Stop telling lame stories. I'm Duke Delaet. I'm a dating coach, and I'm here on the Intimacy Liberation Training channel. We're telling you about how to tell decent stories. Jackson and I just wrote a book on storytelling for dating, and we just did a whole mini workshop on how to not run out of things to say in conversation. But in today's video, I'm going to talk about just the components of a good story so that you can draw the listener in, you can get the person in front of you to really connect with you emotionally. Our brains are wired for storytelling. Our brains are wired to take in data through logical events that are emotionally connected. It's the best way that we can communicate with each other. Even, I've been all over the world doing the dating coaching stuff, and I talk to people who don't have English as their first language, barely understand what I'm saying, and with my facial expressions, with my vocal tonality, with my ability to convey the emotion along with it as it moves along a sort of plot line, they still get caught up in it, and they still get to learn a lot about me as I continue to communicate. All communication, we've believed this for quite some time. I don't know where I got the idea from, but all communication is essentially manipulation. You're trying to take an idea that's in your brain and implant it into somebody else's head and get them to relate in a way that you can have some sort of rapport when you're sharing it. You're trying to manipulate how they're perceiving the past or the current situation with the words that are coming out of your mouth. Language is about manipulating other people's thoughts. Now, you can manipulate it for good, you can manipulate it for bad, you can manipulate it for a group, or you can be really selfish. Like, I'm not worried about the negative connotations of manipulation, but you're trying to create something. And so many people are walking around not intentionally trying to create something in the other person's mind. It doesn't always have to be received the way that you expect it to be received, but you definitely have to be attempting to communicate something very specific. You can't negotiate unless you're trying to do something on purpose. So when you're building stories and you're trying to relate to the person in front of you as you're listening, it's important that you create a structure that'll give them a kind of a payoff at the end, and give them the ability to look back and not only have it be memorable, but to have not wasted their time just sitting there watching you. I have this friend of mine. He's I don't know. He's a little. He didn't get socialized a lot when he was growing up, and so he's learning a lot now. And he goes out and he tries to communicate with all of these people at the bar, and he'll talk to 30-40 people at a night. He's really good at the approaching thing, but when it comes to the storytelling thing, he's constantly trying to find things that are relatable, but there's no point. Like, he starts here and then he doesn't end up anywhere, and it just kind of like says words, and there's not a lot for the people to grab onto. So I was trying to tell him, it's like, look, you kind of got to start with a problem, you got to kind of have a solution, and then you got to kind of relate to what's going on in your emotional core so that they can feel sort of rapport with you. It was a little technical, and I didn't explain it very well, so we'll keep working on that. But the point is, you got to kind of have a structure and build your stories. Even if you build them on the fly, build your stories in a way that will allow people to be taken on a journey with you, and kind of lead them down a path and have it be emotional at the same time. So the first thing you want to focus on as far as key components of key components of a good story is character. You want the listener to know something about the character that's involved. The primary character in any story, if you took a filmmaking class or script writing or whatever, it's the protagonist. It's the person that's kind of the focal point of the story. Many times when you're telling stories in a dating scenario, that person is you. Like, you're the protagonist, and so you're trying to relay some sort of character traits to that person so that they understand who you are without having to directly say it. For instance, like if I wanted to let someone know that I was very protective, that I was the kind of guy who will stand up and assert myself, then if I told a story about how I protected someone, that would accomplish that without me having to say like I'm really protective and I'm just I don't stand for bullshit, right? Like you don't have to say that and announce, like, explain who you are. You can just sort of tell a story. Like one of the classic examples is, I was watching my nephew on the playground, and all of a sudden, one of the other kids on the playground came up and just full blown just pushes him off to the ground, and it seemed totally unprovoked. And I didn't even think, like, it wasn't like a logical thing. I just started running, like my body just like took over, and I just wanted to make sure that thing did not continue to happen. And I sprinted in there and I picked him up and I pulled him away, and the other kids were kind of like scattering, and I'm just like, and like my brain was gone. Like I just reacted. It's just kind of like an intrinsic thing. So I talked to him, and apparently they had some beef earlier or whatever. But when you tell something like that, right? I didn't have to explicitly say that I'm a very protective person, right? That story is a Duke's horrible paraphrase from a classic one from the old pickup community. I think it's attributed to Love Drop. He's a badass, but it'll show that protective nature without having to talk about it, right? So when you start to build the characters, I didn't build any characters there. I was just building the protagonist, me. But if I started adding details to the character, people could really get a feel for who I am in that place, and then they'll be able to kind of future project that into like how they would relate to it, or whether they agree with that, or how I'm going to do that well in their life. So building the character is the first component. Like you have to kind of emotionally connect with whoever the main character of the story is. If you're talking about a friend, third party, if you're talking about your little cousin, you're talking about yourself, it's important that you put a couple of details emotionally of why that happened. Otherwise, it's just kind of like an outlay of facts. It's like I went to the boba store, and then we got boba, and then I drank it, and it was pretty good. It was pretty good, right? And that's like there's no content there. It was like as you're talking and you're relating with that person in front of you, you can be like, okay, well, I try not to drink too much boba because there's way too many calories, but we have this thing. I got a ritual with my buddy Paul. We go to the boba store probably once a week, and we always get the brown sugar thing. He's a little particular with his stuff, so he always gets like half sugar, and there's all this like weird ice request that he makes, and it always takes too goddamn long. But anyway, so we went over to the store, and there was this girl working there, and so anyway, you see what I'm saying? I'm adding details to the whole thing, and it allows me to sort of paint a picture in the listener's mind with the characters involved. The more humans that you talk about in these stories, the more easy it is for your listener to relate to it, and then subsequently get emotionally connected with you. Character. Oh yeah. So, that's a note. The protagonist of the story, whether it's you or anybody else, it kind of takes the listener by the hand and leads them into the emotional components of the story. There's a lot of people out there who will talk about random events without trying to relate the emotional parts of the events to the person in front of them, which is the most powerful form of communication that you can have. The next thing is conflict or problems. Like you have to, you can just tell some drab story about what happened, or you can find a conflict element, something where the character had to surmount some belief in himself, or face off of an adversary, or deal with a bunch of uncomfortableness or drama or whatever it is. That's what creates the drama of the whole situation. If you go out a lot and you see the social groups and how they interact, and you start to interact with them, you'll realize that a lot of people have nothing to say, and their lives aren't particularly interesting. They just kind of go to work, they go to the bar, they get drunk, then they go to work again, and they don't really have a lot of bigger ideas that move through their brains, especially when they're relating in that environment. And so they'll be relatively boring. And then if you can get them to talk about something emotionally, a lot of times they'll just start talking about drama. They'll just talk about, how their friend was dating this dumb dude, and then they didn't like him very much, and then they got in this fight over here, and then that person doesn't like that person, and they start talking about a lot of this like gossipy type drama stuff, because embedded in the drama is drama. Embedded in that type of communication is emotional communicative elements. And so if they can kind of talk shit about somebody, and it kind of shows who they are, in their judgment of that person, or in their relation with that person, then you get a better sense of who they are. And if you agree with them, then you can create that emotional connection. It's kind of the cheap way to create emotional connection with somebody, is to kind of be, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They kind of be on the same side on some sort of dramatic narrative. But if you can tell a story about the events in your life and the passions behind it and whatever, it's kind of a superior way to do that kind of filtering, because you don't have to bring up a lot of the insecurities that happen when, like, if I start talking shit about somebody to you, and I have these negative viewpoints, then you're going to think at some point, like, maybe he's going to talk shit about me in the future. Like, you kind of leave that to the side if you start talking about like your dreams, your goals, your visions, your passions, your ambitions and things like that, where you connect it with the emotions that are a little bit more clean, that raise a whole lot less insecurities in the person that you're talking to. So find a conflict, find a problem, and then you can relate your internals, your value systems, your beliefs. You can relate them by speaking about this conflict and how you're dealing with it, or how the protagonist in your story is dealing with it. And once the conflict is set up, give the conflict a little bit details, like give a little bit of context on why that conflict is so important. And very often when you're in the middle of the story, somebody won't understand how important the conflict is, or they wouldn't react similarly, and they'll respond, I don't think that's very like, what made you do that, right? And that can create more connection as you begin to explain yourself, or you can create conflict between you and that other person, and it creates a different type of bond. But how you deal with conflict, or how your protagonist deals with conflict, is going to be essential in conveying the emotional journey that you went on as the events had transpired. And then the next thing is the solution. Right, so you run into a conflict, you run into a problem, and then you come up with a solution, or you come with a resolution, at least. From the old storytelling, like the stuff I studied in college, it's conflict resolution, right? So you find a way to resolve the conflict, and sometimes you can leave it open-ended. Like, you don't necessarily have to like be a hero in the story. You can be a villain, or you can be a bystander, or whatever. But at some point, the story has to resolve. Like, it's like, I ran into this person, and then he mistaked me for somebody else, and then he wanted to fight me. Well, there's my conflict. And then internally, I was looking him in the eye, and I didn't want to like look like a weakling, but I also did not want to get punched in the face by this dude. Not that I'm particularly scared of getting punched in the face, but I wanted to resolve this thing as best as I could. And so I just kind of kept looking at him, and he looked at me, and it's one of those looks that those drunk guys get when they're like, okay, I'm not gonna fuck anybody in this bar, so I guess I'm gonna punch somebody. they're just kind of like, I'm looking for some reason to express my emotions. And I looked at him and I was like, I don't, okay, sure. And he was like, you want to get punched in the face right now? I'm like, not particularly. And I was like, it's kind of funny though. Like, just relating with the guy, and there's no fear. I wasn't like looking like a little bitch, but I also wasn't buying into his game. And so eventually, he just kind of gave up because he had a structure in his brain on how he wanted to initiate conflict and how he wanted to resolve it, and I did not want to do it that way, and I didn't really give credence to it. So he just kind of abandoned his tactics because he didn't have any. He couldn't deal with the added confusion I had offered in the situation. He eventually like put his arm around me, did his little alpha hug thing, and then I was like, all right, I'm gonna go smoke. He smoked, let's go. And then he did not want to smoke, so he left. Um, uh, as I'm telling the story and I go off into my memories or whatever, I'm talking kind of about I'm the kind of guy who does this and he's the kind of guy who does that, and I did this and there was a conflict there, and I was feeling like, oh, I don't want to look like a bitch, but I also don't want to get punched in the face. Like all of those things are like little details that say, okay, well, there's a conflict and then there was a resolution, right? It doesn't have to be all that interesting. And when you're talking, like, there's a lot of the critics out there who's going to be like, dude, you're talking horseshit. Like, yeah, great character conflict resolution, script writing, great. But in real life, like, go out tonight and have a conversation with some random people at the bar and see how they don't add any value to the conversation emotionally unless they drop in a drama. If you can do this intentionally, even though it seems a little bit simple, as you go out and you practice this stuff, you can effectively outdo the connection with the people that are around you and kind of be a big fish, small pond. People who are excellent communicators who go out and just like me, I'm a public speaker, and when I'm well slept or whatever, I'm pretty running circles around most people in the bar scenario at least. And I'm not like the greatest ever, but it is what it is. And so when I go out, like, I'm intentionally trying to be like, okay, this is who I am. This is the kind of people I connect to. These are the values that I have, and weave them into events that have happened. Weave them into stories. Weave them into recall from the past. And when I'm breaking off on the keywords that other people are saying, like they'll talk about a story about their sister or whatever, and then it reminds me of my sister, so then I start talking about my sister. But I'm not just trying to say like, look, we both have sisters, we're connected. No, it's more like, this is the kind of brother I am. This is the kind of sibling I am. This is the kind of family person I am. This is what I do in the events when she flips out like that. This is how I relate to women that I care about. Those types of emotional concepts are what I'm trying to communicate, and I'm trying to find a conflict, show who I am through that conflict, and then show who I am through the resolution. And it's not like I consciously do it all the time, but very often in my field reports, when I come out after going out and after having a bunch of conversations, I can think, okay, I could have told that story better this way. I could have given more credence or value to the emotional side of it by doing this, or by saying this, or including this detail. And it's very often in the reconsolidation after the fact, and when I'm kind of going over all the communication that I went through for the night, like how well I communicated. If I look over that stuff, then it gives me the fuel to communicate better the next day, and then the next day, and then the next day. And I can slowly iterate that over time and become a much better influencer of the people that are sitting in front of me. So the three elements for the storytelling is, if you got a firm grasp on this stuff, you can go out and just practice it iteratively. Right? It's building your character, and you can do that with just a sentence and talk about, I'm the kind of guy who this, or I normally don't do, but this time I did, right? That kind of stuff can build that character, set a frame of like, okay, I can kind of expect what this person's going to do in the situation, and then you bring a problem, bring a conflict. And it's like, oh, then I ran into this thing and I like didn't quite know how to deal with it, so I had to check in and whatever. So you talk about all that, and then you let it resolve, and it can be 3 sentences long and 12 seconds, or you can drag it out over a couple minutes. It doesn't really matter. Uh, this is more in the comfort side of things, where you're trying to like show people who you are. In the old, where am I going with this? Oh yeah, 3 elements. I was summarizing 3 elements. Yeah, character, problem, resolution. But then, there are many times in conversations with people that you just kind of want to free flow and not say anything of note. You just kind of, oh yeah, really? Is that what we're doing now? Like, like just egg people on, fuck with them, whatever. It's like a different thing. Like if you want to show who you are, like the old pickup guys, they wanted to tell stories right away, and the reason they wanted to do that is because they wanted to demonstrate that they were people of value, right? They called it DHV, demonstrating higher value. And what they would do is they would tell stories that were interlaced with attraction switches and positive things about the storyteller, so that when they got done with the story, the people that they were talking to would have a very clear understanding of who they were, and then start to react to the positive aspects of the story. So it's kind of like when you're running an ad on Facebook. Like sometimes nobody clicks on your ad, and then so you tweak the text, or you tweak the copy, or you tweak the headline, or you tweak the colors or whatever, and then you run it again and you see if they respond. And then at a certain point, after you do this a few times, you realize that there are certain elements of the ad that are going to draw your audience in and click on it. And the higher your click-through rate is, the better your ads perform generally. So in the same way, when you're telling stories and you do it over and over again as you go out, you can start to kind of hack the elements of it that are going to really draw people in and get you positive responses and get you get attraction. If you're following the old mystery method, like you were looking for some specific things that they're going to respond, that let you know that they're into it, they're hooked, they're attracted, and then you kind of move on from there. But I find that a lot of the storytelling works really, really well when you already kind of developed a little bit of rapport, and then you drop into a more connecting, relating type phase. In the old M3 model, it was the connection phase, or the comfort phase. And then, if you listen to like some of the 10-second attraction stuff from like Meow or whatever, he'll talk about cutting things off and then letting the other person respond, and then carry it in, and then multi-threading. And so it kind of gets a little bit complicated, but if you can just remember that you need to develop your character before you start talking about problems, and then you need to talk about problems and develop those things, and then you resolve it. And you can do this on multiple different levels, but those are the 3 key traits for telling decent stories. Yeah, I think that's all I had to say about that. There's a video here and a video here that YouTube thinks you ought to watch. And if you don't be subscribed to this thing and you made it this far, then fucking hit the subscribe button, because 24 minutes later, you're still here. So click the button. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. We do this every damn day, and I'll see you then. Until then, stay awesome.